Marcus was a 17-year-old high school student who lived in a quiet neighborhood. He was tall for his age, with a friendly smile and a natural talent for fixing things. If something was broken, Marcus could usually figure out a way to make it work again. His mother always said he had magic hands when it came to electronics, but to him, it was just something he enjoyed doing. One afternoon, after finishing his basketball practice, Marcus was walking home when he noticed his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, standing outside her house. She looked worried as she peered through her window. Marcus had seen her before, but had never really spoken to her except for a polite hello in passing. She was a small woman, probably in her late 70s, with silver hair neatly tied back and glasses resting on her nose. Curious, Marcus slowed down and asked, "Everything okay, ma'am?" Mrs. Donnelly turned to him with a sigh. "Oh, it's this darn TV," she said, shaking her head. "It just stopped working last night. I've tried everything, but I can't figure it out." Marcus could hear the frustration in her voice. He glanced inside and saw the television sitting in the middle of her cozy living room, completely dark. "I could take a look if you want," he offered. "I'm pretty good with this kind of stuff." Mrs. Donnelly's face lit up with surprise. "Would you? That would be wonderful. I was thinking I'd have to call someone, but those repair guys charge so much these days." Marcus followed her inside. The house smelled like fresh-baked cookies and lavender, reminding him of his grandmother's home. Books and photo frames lined the shelves, and an old cat was curled up in the corner, lazily watching him with half-closed eyes. He set down his backpack and walked over to the TV. "What happened when it stopped working?" he asked as he pressed a few buttons. "I was watching my show last night, and then, all of a sudden, the screen just went black. I tried unplugging it and plugging it back in, but nothing," she explained. Marcus nodded and got to work. He checked the power cord, then looked behind the TV to see if anything was loose. As he moved a few cables, he noticed the problem almost immediately. A wire had come loose from the back. Carefully, he reconnected it and pressed the power button. With a small beep, the TV came back to life, filling the room with sound. "Oh my goodness," Mrs. Donnelly gasped, clapping her hands together. "You did it, just like that." Marcus grinned. It was just a loose cable, nothing major. The elderly woman shook her head in amazement. "Well, it may have been nothing major to you, young man, but you just saved me a whole lot of trouble." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a few bills. "Here, take this. You earned it." Marcus shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am. That's okay. I was happy to help." Mrs. Donnelly's smile grew even warmer. "You sure? It's not every day you find a young man as kind as you." "I'm sure," Marcus said. "If it ever acts up again, just let me know." As he picked up his backpack and headed toward the door, Mrs. Donnelly called after him. "You're a good boy, Marcus. The world needs more people like you." Marcus smiled as he walked home. He hadn't done anything special, just helped a neighbor. But something about the way Mrs. Donnelly looked at him made him feel like he had made her day a little brighter. He had no idea that his small act of kindness was about to change his life forever. The next afternoon, Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table, finishing his homework when he heard a knock at the door. His mother, who was cooking dinner, wiped her hands on a towel and went to see who it was. Marcus wasn't paying much attention until he heard his mother's voice change. "Yes, officer. Is something wrong?" His head snapped up. "An officer?" Marcus quickly got up and walked to the door. Standing outside was Mrs. Donnelly, but she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a tall police officer in a dark blue uniform, his badge shining in the sunlight. His face was serious, and for a moment, Marcus felt his stomach twist. Had he done something wrong? His mother's expression was tense as she glanced at Marcus, then back at the officer. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice cautious. Marcus swallowed hard, trying to think. He had just gone to school, come home, and helped fix Mrs. Donnelly's TV. Nothing out of the ordinary. Why would a cop be at his door? Mrs. Donnelly stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Oh, no, dear. Don't worry. I called him," she said. Marcus and his mother exchanged confused looks. "She called the police. But why?" The officer cleared his throat and looked at Marcus. "You're Marcus, right?" "Yes, sir," Marcus said, standing up straighter. "I hear you're pretty handy with electronics," the officer said. His voice wasn't harsh, but it wasn't friendly either. It was the kind of voice that made people listen. Marcus hesitated, glancing at Mrs. Donnelly. I guess so," he said. "I just fixed her TV yesterday. It wasn't a big deal." Mrs. Donnelly chuckled. "That's what you think. But to me, it was a big deal. And I wasn't going to let your kindness go unnoticed." Marcus still didn't understand what was happening. His mother folded her arms, still wary. "So why did you bring an officer to our house?" she asked. The officer's face softened, and this time he smiled a little. "Mrs. Donnelly told me about what you did. She was so impressed that she reached out to a few people. Turns out, the community center downtown runs a program for young people who are good with technology. They offer paid internships and training. She thought you'd be perfect for it." Marcus blinked. "Wait. What?" Mrs. Donnelly nodded eagerly. "I made a few calls this morning. One of my old friends used to work with the center, and she put in a good word for you. And since Officer Daniels here helps with the program, I asked him to come along and tell you in person." Marcus's mouth opened, but no words came out. His mother looked just as shocked. "You mean you're not here to arrest him?" she asked. The officer actually laughed. "No, ma'am. I'm here to offer him an opportunity." Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. His heart was still beating fast, but now for a completely different reason. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. Mrs. Donnelly patted his arm. "Say yes, dear. You deserve it." Marcus looked at his mother, who was still processing everything. Slowly, she smiled. "If this is real, then yes, I think he should do it." Marcus grinned. "Then yes," he said, feeling the excitement build inside him. The officer nodded approvingly. "Great. Come by the community center tomorrow afternoon, and we'll get you set up." As they walked away, Mrs. Donnelly turned and gave Marcus one last smile. "See, a little kindness goes a long way." Marcus stood in the doorway, watching them leave, still in shock. Yesterday, he was just fixing a TV. Today, his whole future might have changed. The next day, Marcus could hardly focus at school. His mind kept going back to what had happened the evening before. Mrs. Donnelly had shown up at his house with a police officer, not to accuse him of anything, but to offer him an opportunity. It still didn't feel real. A paid internship at a community center, all because he fixed a TV. It was almost too good to be true. When the final bell rang, Marcus grabbed his backpack and hurried home. His mother was already waiting for him by the door. "You ready?" she asked with a smile. He nodded, though his stomach was filled with nervous energy. "Yeah, I think so." The two of them walked to the community center, which wasn't too far from their house. Marcus had passed by the building plenty of times before, but he had never been inside. It was a big place with glass windows and a colorful mural painted on the side. Kids played basketball outside, and a few teenagers sat on the steps talking. When they walked in, a friendly-looking woman at the front desk smiled at them. "You must be Marcus," she said. "Officer Daniels told us to expect you." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied politely. She led them down a hallway and into a room filled with tables, computers, and tools. A few other teens were already inside, working on different projects. Some were taking apart old radios, while others were fixing game controllers or phones. It looked like a workshop, and Marcus immediately felt a spark of excitement. A tall man with glasses and a gray beard walked over. "You must be the new guy," he said, shaking Marcus's hand. "I'm Mr. Lewis. I run the tech repair program here." "It's nice to meet you, sir," Marcus said. Mr. Lewis smiled. So I heard you fixed Mrs. Donnelly's TV. Marcus shrugged. It was just a loose cable. The older man chuckled. Maybe to you, but not to her. That's the thing about fixing things, Marcus. Sometimes, what seems small to you can make a big difference for someone else. Marcus thought about that for a moment and nodded. Mr. Lewis led him over to one of the work tables. We teach all kinds of skills here, he explained. Repairing electronics, coding, even 3D printing. If you stick with the program, you could turn this into a real career one day. Marcus looked around at the different projects, feeling more excited by the second. He had always liked fixing things, but he had never thought about making a career out of it. Come on, Mr. Lewis said. Let's see what you can do. He handed Marcus an old gaming console and a screwdriver. This one stopped working last week. See if you can figure out the problem. Marcus took the console apart carefully, checking the wires and circuits. It didn't take him long to find the issue. A small piece had come loose, just like the cable on Mrs. Donnelly's TV. He reconnected it, closed the console, and pressed the power button. The screen lit up. Mr. Lewis nodded approvingly. Not bad, Hid. You've got a good eye. Marcus felt a rush of pride. Maybe he really did have a talent for this. As he looked around the room, he realized something. This wasn't just about fixing things. It was about solving problems, helping people, and making a difference. And for the first time, Marcus saw a future filled with possibilities. Over the next few weeks, Marcus spent most of his afternoons at the community center. At first, he felt like the new guy, but that feeling didn't last long. The other teens in the program were friendly, and Mr. Lewis made sure everyone got a chance to learn. Marcus quickly found that he wasn't just good at fixing things. He loved it. There was something satisfying about taking apart a broken device, finding the problem, and making it work again. It felt like solving a puzzle, and every time he fixed something, he got better at it. One afternoon, as he worked on an old laptop, Mr. Lewis walked over and watched him for a moment. You know, he said, you've got a real gift for this, Marcus. Marcus looked up, surprised. You think so? Mr. Lewis nodded. You learn fast. You pay attention to details. And most importantly, you don't give up when something doesn't work right away. That's what makes a great technician. Marcus felt a swell of pride. No one had ever told him that before. Sure, his mom always said he was smart, but hearing it from someone like Mr. Lewis, someone who actually worked in the field, meant a lot. Just then, Officer Daniels walked into the room, carrying a box. Got a special delivery for you, Marcus, he said with a grin. Marcus wiped his hands on his jeans and took the box. It wasn't very big, but it had some weight to it. He opened it carefully and was shocked to see a brand new set of tools. Professional-grade screwdrivers, pliers, a multimeter, and even a soldering kit. His eyes widened. Is this for me? Officer Daniels nodded. Courtesy of the community center. Mr. Lewis put in a request for you. You've earned it. Marcus was speechless. He had been using the shared tools at the center, which were good, but this was something else. With these tools, he could fix almost anything. His mother, who had come to pick him up, smiled proudly. Looks like people are noticing your talent, son. Marcus ran his fingers over the tools, still in disbelief. Thank you, he said, looking at Mr. Lewis and Officer Daniels. I don't know what to say. Mr. Lewis chuckled. Say you'll keep working hard. That's all we ask. Marcus nodded. I will. That night, as he sat at the kitchen table, looking at his new tools, he realized how much had changed in just a few weeks. He had gone from a kid who liked fixing things to someone with real skills, someone people believed in. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness, helping an elderly woman with her TV. A few more weeks passed, and Marcus continued to grow more confident in his skills. Every day after school, he headed straight to the community center, eager to learn more. He fixed everything from broken radios to cracked phone screens. The more he practiced, the better he got. One afternoon, Mr. Lewis called him over. "Marcus, I have a special project for you," he said. Marcus wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over. "What is it?" Mr. Lewis pointed to an old desktop computer sitting on the workbench. "This was donated to the center, but it won't turn on. Think you can figure out what's wrong?" Marcus nodded. "I'll try." He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. First, he checked the power supply. No issues there. Then he opened the case and carefully examined the inside. He noticed a few loose connections and a lot of dust clogging up the fans. After cleaning it out and securing the cables, he pressed the power button. Nothing happened. Marcus frowned. What else could be wrong? He took a deep breath and went over everything again. Finally, he noticed something small but important. The RAM stick wasn't properly seated. He carefully adjusted it, put the cover back on, and tried again. This time, the computer whirred to life. Mr. Lewis, who had been watching, grinned. "Nice job, Marcus. That's exactly the kind of patience and problem-solving you need in this field." Marcus smiled, feeling proud. "It just took a little extra checking." Mr. Lewis nodded. "That's what makes you good at this. Some people give up too quickly, but you keep looking until you find the problem." Just then, a woman walked into the room. She was dressed in business clothes and carried a clipboard. Mr. Lewis greeted her with a handshake. "Marcus, this is Ms. Taylor. She works with a local tech company." Marcus quickly wiped his hands and shook hers. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." She smiled. "I've heard a lot about you, Marcus. Mr. Lewis told me how quickly you've picked up these skills. We're looking for bright young minds to join our company's summer internship program. Would you be interested?" Marcus blinked. A real internship? With a tech company? His heart started pounding. "Really?" Ms. Taylor nodded. "It's a paid internship, and you get hands-on experience with real tech repairs and installations. It could be a great step toward a career." Marcus felt like he was dreaming. He looked at Mr. Lewis, who gave him an encouraging nod. "I'd love to," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. Ms. Taylor smiled. "Great. I'll send over the details. We're excited to have you." After she left, Marcus turned to Mr. Lewis. "I can't believe this is happening." Mr. Lewis chuckled. "Believe it, kid. You earned it." That night, Marcus told his mother about the internship. She hugged him tightly, her eyes full of pride. "I knew you were special, Marcus. This is just the beginning." As he lay in bed later that night, staring at the ceiling, Marcus thought about how much had changed. All because he had stopped to help a neighbor. The days leading up to Marcus's first day at the internship felt like a blur. He still couldn't believe it was happening. Just a few weeks ago, he was fixing an elderly woman's TV, and now he was about to work at a real tech company. His mother helped him prepare, making sure he had everything he needed. First impressions matter. She reminded him as she ironed his best shirt. "Be confident, be polite, and work hard. You got this." On the morning of his first day, Marcus stood in front of the mirror, taking a deep breath. He was nervous, but he was also excited. This was his chance to prove himself. When he arrived at the tech company, he was greeted by Ms. Taylor, the woman who had offered him the internship. "Welcome, Marcus," she said with a smile. "Are you ready to get started?" "Yes, ma'am," he said eagerly. She led him through the office, introducing him to the team. The place was filled with desks, computers, and shelves stacked with electronic devices. Some employees were on calls, while others were busy repairing or testing equipment. Marcus was paired with a technician named James, who showed him around the repair station. "We handle all kinds of tech issues here. Broken laptops, slow computers, network problems. You name it," James explained. Marcus listened carefully, taking in every detail. His first task was to help diagnose a malfunctioning tablet. He carefully examined it, just like he had learned at the community center. After testing a few things, he realized the charging port was loose. James watched as Marcus carefully took the tablet apart, adjusted the port, and reassembled it. When Marcus plugged it in, the tablet started charging. James nodded approvingly. "Not bad for your first day. You've got a good eye." Marcus grinned. "Thanks. I've had some good practice." Throughout the day, Marcus worked on different devices, learning new techniques and asking questions. He loved every minute of it. This wasn't just a job. It was something he was passionate about. At lunch, Miss Taylor sat with him. "You're doing great, Marcus," she said. "If you keep this up, there may be more opportunities for you here in the future." Marcus felt a rush of excitement. More opportunities. Could this lead to something bigger? By the end of the day, he was exhausted but happy. As he packed up to leave, James patted him on the back. "You did good today, kid. Keep it up." When Marcus got home, his mother was waiting for him, eager to hear about his first day. He told her everything, his words spilling out in excitement. She smiled, listening proudly. "I knew you would do well," she said. "This is only the beginning, Marcus. Keep working hard, and the sky's the limit." As Marcus lay in bed that night, he thought about how much his life had changed. And to think, it had all started with a simple act of kindness. He smiled to himself. This was just the beginning of something great. As the weeks passed, Marcus became more comfortable at his internship. Each day, he learned something new. He wasn't just fixing broken devices, he was understanding how they worked. James, the technician he worked with, was impressed by his progress. "You pick things up fast," he told Marcus one afternoon. "Most new interns take months to get to this level." Marcus smiled. "I just really enjoy this." And he did. Every challenge excited him. If a laptop wouldn't turn on, he didn't just check the battery. He checked the motherboard, the circuits, and even the tiny components most people ignored. He loved finding the problem and fixing it. One day, Miss Taylor called him into her office. "Marcus, I have something special for you," she said. He sat down, curious. "There's an upcoming city-wide tech competition for young people," she explained. "It's open to students and interns. The challenge is to repair and improve an old device, making it work better than before." Marcus's eyes widened. "That sounds amazing." She smiled. "I thought you'd think so. I want you to enter. You'll be representing our company." Marcus felt both excited and nervous. This was a big deal. "Are you sure I'm ready?" he asked. Miss Taylor nodded. "I wouldn't have suggested it if I didn't think you could do it." That night, Marcus told his mother about the competition. She was thrilled. "You should go for it. This is a great opportunity." Marcus thought about it for a long time. He had come so far, but could he really compete against other students, some of whom might have had years of experience? Then he reminded himself how it all started. He was just a kid who liked fixing things. But now, people believed in him. He made up his mind. "I'm going to do it," he said. The next day at work, James helped him pick a project. They found an old, broken-down gaming console that someone had donated. It wouldn't turn on. The screen was cracked, and the buttons barely worked. "Think you can fix it?" James asked with a grin. Marcus examined it closely. It was a mess, but he saw potential. "I think I can do more than fix it," Marcus said. "I think I can make it better." For the next 2 weeks, he worked harder than ever. He stayed late at the community center, using every skill he had learned. He replaced the screen, rewired the circuit board, and even added new features that the console didn't originally have. Finally, the day of the competition arrived. Marcus looked at his finished project with pride. It was no longer just a broken device. It was something new, something better. His mother gave him a reassuring hug before he left. "No matter what happens today, just remember how far you've come," she said. Marcus nodded. Win or lose, he knew one thing for sure. He was exactly where he was meant to be. The day of the competition was finally here. Marcus stood in a large hall filled with other students and interns, each presenting their own tech projects. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Rows of tables displayed everything from modified computers to creative new gadgets. Marcus took a deep breath as he set up his project, a fully restored and upgraded gaming console. It looked brand new, with a smooth screen, responsive buttons, and extra features that even the original model didn't have. He had worked hard on this, and now it was time to see if his effort would pay off. As the judges walked around, Marcus watched them carefully. They asked questions, inspected the devices, and took notes. He felt nervous, but he reminded himself of everything he had learned. No matter what happened, he had already come so far. When the judges reached his table, one of them picked up the console and turned it on. The screen lit up instantly, smooth and clear. They tested the buttons, checked the software, and nodded in approval. "This is impressive," one of the judges said. "You didn't just fix it, you improved it." Marcus smiled. "Yes, sir. I wanted to make something better, not just repair what was broken." The judges exchanged looks and wrote something on their clipboards. "Great work, Marcus," another judge said before moving to the next table. Marcus let out a breath of relief. At least they seemed to like it. After all the projects were reviewed, the competition host stepped onto the stage. "And now, the moment you've all been waiting for," he announced. "We will reveal the top 3 winners of this year's tech competition." Marcus's heart pounded as the host read the names. Third place went to a student who had built a smart home security system. Second place was awarded to someone who had developed a custom-designed drone. And the first place winner, for his outstanding restoration and enhancement of an old gaming console, is Marcus Williams. Marcus froze for a moment. Had he really won? The crowd applauded as he made his way to the stage. Ms. Taylor and James clapped proudly, and his mother had tears in her eyes. A judge handed him a trophy and a certificate. "Congratulations, Marcus. Your work showed both skill and creativity. Keep up the great work." Marcus held the trophy in his hands, still in shock. He looked at the crowd, at his mother, at Miss Taylor and James. It was all real. He had won. After the event, several people came up to him to shake his hand and congratulate him. A representative from a well-known tech company even gave him a business card. "If you keep working like this, we'd love to see you apply for our advanced internship program," the man told him. Marcus could barely believe it. A future in tech was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a reality. That night, when he got home, he placed the trophy on his desk and sat down, staring at it. He thought back to the moment it all began, the day he helped an elderly woman fix her TV. Back then, he never could have imagined where that one small act would lead him. His mother walked in and smiled. "You did it, Marcus." He smiled back. "Yeah, Mom, I did." But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning.